Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see everyone. We've got a couple guests scheduled for today, and so these are faculty members in our discipline, chemistry and biochemistry. And so the first one up to talk today is Dr. Hamadi, who joined our university in January of this year. And so looking forward to talking with you all and maybe getting some of you interested in doing research in her laboratory. So if you want to come around, I'll let you go ahead and take control.
Thank you, Dr. Masterson. Good afternoon, everybody, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys about my background and what we are doing here in our lab at USM. So a little bit about my educational background. I got my bachelor in chemical engineering and my master in energy system engineering back from my home country. I came to US in 2012 and I started my PhD at University of New Hampshire. I got my PhD in chemical engineering in 2016. Right after that, I started my postdoc at Purdue University. I was at Purdue for almost 2 years. And after that, I started my independent career as an assistant professor of chemical engineering at Oklahoma State University. I was at Oklahoma State University for almost 6 years, 5.5 years. And my small family brought me here, so we decided that here is the place that we want to raise families. So as Dr. Masterson mentioned, I have been here at USM since January 2024. It's been a great experience so far, and I'm so excited about the opportunities that I'm going to have here at USM, and hopefully get some of you interested in what we are doing and we are planning to do in our lab at USM. Here is the schematic of our lab. I know that some of it is small and you may not be able to see it, so I'm going to walk through that. First of all, I'm going to ask you questions. How many of you know how a small nano is? For example, 1 nanometer equal to how many meters?
10 to the power 9.
10 to the power of minus 9. Great, most of you know. So can you tell me when could be the National Nanotechnology Day based on that scale? October 9th. About a week ago was the National Nanotechnology Day, because basically how small it is. And this is what we are doing in our lab. We are dealing with nanomaterial. We are synthesizing nanomaterials. And we specifically are focusing on metal nanostructures, which means that metals that they are in the scale of nano. And as you can see on the top of this schematic, we call our lab as Green Nanotechnology and Green Nanomanufacturing Lab. And the reason for that is we are trying to use and apply the principles of green chemistry and the principles of green nanotechnology and green engineering in the synthesis of nanomaterials to have more sustainable and more green process for the synthesis of nanomaterials, specifically metal nanostructures. And as you can see in the middle of that schematic, that you can see a few syringes with syringe pump. We are trying to replace the batch reactor with the continuous reactor. What does that mean? Instead of putting everything in a flask and let it run at a specific temperature and reaction condition, we are trying to have a continuous manner by which we can produce these nanostructures. And not only we can have a larger scale with lower waste, which contributes to one of the principles of green chemistry, but at the same time we can have a better control over our reaction, which means that we will have a better control over the size and morphology of metal nanostructures that we are producing. Earlier I mentioned that we are focusing currently on metal nanostructures, and more specifically on silver and palladium now. We are trying to synthesize one-dimensional silver and palladium nanostructure. What does that mean? It means that having silver or palladium in the shape and morphology of wires or rods with one dimension at least in a scale of nano less than 100 nanometer. And there are different approaches that we can use to synthesize those metal nanostructures. For example, one of the approaches, the top left-hand kind of schematic for the project, which is funded by National Science Foundation, it's a still chemical process because we are using organic solvent, organic reducing agent, The temperature is relatively high at 150, 170, and it could be like, energy demanding when you are considering like the larger scale production. However, we are doing that in a continuous process, which means that we are continuously producing silver nanowires, and then we modify the surface of these silver nanowires with palladium nanostructures to increase their stability against oxidation. And then our final goal is to connect these synthesis and modification process to a printer. We have like a 3D printer that we can print different patterns on flexible substrate. So you may ask, what could be like the applications for that? If you look at like your laptop, cell phone, LEDs, LCDs, solar cell, lots of other applications, there are the transparent conductive films and transparent conductive electrodes. And this is the way that we can produce those, or like fabricate or manufacture those transparent conductive films or electrodes. And I was mentioning that we are trying to address like the principles of green chemistry and green nanotechnology, right? So I didn't include the schematic here, but we were able to find that there are two green reducing agents. One of them is tannic acid that can be found in your Coke, coffee, tea, that can be used as a green reducing agent to produce silver nanowires at room temperature. We were able to conduct that synthesis process in a continuous manner. We were conducting lots of characterization because we wanted to know what is behind the process or behind the reaction. For example, how tannic acid can act as a reducing agent or a stabilizing agent or capping agent in our synthesis process. So there are like UVVs, FTIR, and lots of other characterization that we use to answer those fundamental questions behind our synthesis process. And finally, when we have like our structures, we need to take a picture and we need to see them because they are small. They are in nanoscale. We cannot see them with naked eye. We cannot even see them with like regular microscopy. We have to use electron microscopy, transmission electron microscopy, or scanning electron microscopy to see our metal nanostructures and take a picture of those. And we were also able to find that L-ascorbic acid, known as vitamin C in your orange, lemon, lime, can be used as reducing agent to synthesize one-dimensional palladium nanostructures in a continuous manner. So you can tell that how we can use these reagents at lower temperature with using water as solvent to have more green and sustainable synthesis of metal nanostructures. There is another approach that we can use to synthesize these one-dimensional metal nanostructures as well, and is by using a biotemplate. With a biotemplate that has a specific size and morphology, which is covered with amino acids with a specific functional groups. Those functional groups can act as reducing agent to reduce metal ions and convert those to metal atoms to create metal nanostructures. For example, we are collaborating with Purdue University and University of Delaware. So our collaborator at University of Delaware expressing virus-like particles for us, sending those to us to use as a biotemplate for the attachment of metal nanostructures such as palladium. And then we need to come up with some sort of heating or annealing process to remove the biotemplate and have a single crystal, let's say palladium nanorods with higher conductivity. These are a few examples about the methods that we are using in our lab for the synthesis of metal nanostructures. And however, these continuous reactors that we are designing and setting up in our reactor are not limited to the synthesis of metal nanostructures. They can be used for the synthesis of other nanomaterials in general. For example, as you can see in the schematic on very end corner of this slide, we recently showed that these continuous reactors can be used for the synthesis of protein polymer nanoparticles that can be used for gene delivery, drug delivery. And when we had a comparison between the protein polymer nanoparticles produced in batch compared to the continuous process that we developed, we had much better control over the size and distribution of these nanoparticles. We were able to produce very nicely uniform protein polymer nanoparticles, which is really important when you imagine the applications as drug delivery. You want to make sure that all of those are behaving or functioning the same when you are using them for specific drug delivery applications. So it was just like a summary about like the research that we are doing in our lab. If you are interested in learning more about like any of like these projects, you have my email address on the top. Feel free to shoot me an email and I will be more than happy to sit and talk to you about like any of those and any other like, projects that we have related to the continuous synthesis of nanomaterial. In terms of teaching, this semester at USM, I'm teaching chemical literature. So maybe in future you will have me as your instructor for chemical literature. And previously I have taught senior design, like chemical reaction design, economic evaluation. So maybe in your future, like project, I will be able to help you in that regard as well. I will be happy to take and answer any questions that you may have.
Are there any questions for Dr. Amadei?
Yes, please.
You said that you can take citric acid, the kind of stuff, and you said oranges, lemons, limes. We can make platinum with that? Did I mishear?
Palladium.
Palladium. Okay. Got it.
So we are using those as reducing agent. We are not extracting those directly from like lemon, lime, or orange. We are using, for example, L-ascorbic acid, which is like available, for example, by Sigma average, but it's just like vitamin C that can be used. Some people are like extracting those by like themselves in the lab, but we are just using like the available chemical as a reducing agent for the synthesis of metal nanostructures, such as palladium.
And then palladium is also a really good conductor, you said.
It is, but like the first application could be like the catalysis. And when we can precisely control the size and morphology, we can make like the palladium nanostructure with the specific size and morphology that we want for the specific reaction functioning as catalysis.
Okay, I see.
Any other questions? Well, I'll ask one. Could you kind of tell the students if they were to come and work with you as an undergraduate researcher, what a typical week might be on a project?
Sure. Currently, I have 2 undergraduate students in my lab. So far, they started, I think, after 2 weeks, not like the very first week of like the fall semester. And so far, we have like finished all of like the training. So I trained them on all of like the synthesis process, both in batch and millifluidic reactor, using like the centrifuge machine that we have in the lab, how to separate like the nanostructures, how we can use like the UV-Vis machine that we have in the lab to conduct like the kinetic study, create like the calibration curve. So I just want to make sure that they have all of like the experience as like the skills that they need to be kind of able to independently working in the lab under the supervision of a graduate student. And currently they are working on Monday, Wednesday, Friday morning in my lab. But I will work with like an individual undergraduate student depending on their availability, their coursework, because I always tell them your coursework is your first priority.
Absolutely, yeah. Any other questions? Well, I would encourage you all, if you're interested at all in what I view kind of as a chemistry with an engineering bend to it, for sure, to consider going by and talking to Dr. Ahmadi about maybe getting involved in undergraduate research. Would you be taking students next semester or?
Yes, I have already, like, beside like the 2 current students that I have, they are taking intro to research as like the course credit for conducting research in my lab. I already have like another student who contacted me and I said, yes, please go ahead and enroll for the intro to research. If you just email me in advance, I will let you know if there is like still a spots available, but yes,
Okay.
I will.
Well, great. Well, if there are no other questions, let's thank her again. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Next up is Dr. Woojin Miao. Woojin, you want to come on up? Do you have a PowerPoint?
No, I don't have. I think I sent you one slide.
You sent me one?
Yes, you said the one slide only.
Yeah.
I rely on you, so.
Okay. Well, I will pull it up then. You sent it to me by email?
Yeah, that's fine. Or I can talk just a few minutes.
Yeah, just let me see if I can pull it up on the email here real quick.
Outlook was acting weird this morning.
Yeah, it's things have
Or I
slowed
can
down. I don't know what's-
project here. If you.
Doo-doo-doo-doo. Let's see, Woojin. There we go. Sure enough, there it is. All right, folks, I'm proud to introduce Dr. Wujin Miao. Wujin and I came to USM the same year, actually. We've been here
20 years ago.
20 years ago. That's right. Man, time does fly, doesn't it? So, he's an analytical chemist, and I'll let him tell you a little bit about what he does.
All right, you can see the photo, right? Compare with current situation, a lot of gray hairs. So the time flies, right? 20 years. So in 2004, I was hired here as analytic chemist. So naturally, my work that's in the analytic chemistry, but I put something before analytic chemistry, which is so-called electroanalytical chemistry, which is a branch of analytic chemistry with electrochemical technique for analysis of target molecules or systems. So in our lab, we have several keywords for the research. One is electrochemistry, which is a study of reactions with electron transfer or charge transfer or oxidation reduction process. The second one is biosensors, which is use electrochemical technique to analyze biomolecules, such as protein, DNA, virus, other biorelated molecules, or called biomarkers. The third one is electrogenerated chemiluminescence, which is a combination of electrochemistry with spectroscopy. So spectroscopy basically the technique of applying light to the system produce signal to analyze the property of the system. So combine electrochemistry and spectroscopy together, we call electrogenerated chemiluminescence, or ECL. In the last several years, we have been working on so-called electrocatalysts. Sometimes we put photo before electrocatalyst, photoelectrocatalyst. So why we are interested in these kind of techniques? There are a lot of demanding for sensitive detection or selective detection of biomolecules, such as DNA, protein, and virus. So one way to do is you can use traditional electrochemistry, but that technique is not sensitive enough. You can also use such as mass spec, expert here, Dr. Musson, but that's expensive. Fluorescence can we detect something, but there are some problems. So we try to use our technique, which is ECL. This technique provides very sensitive, selective, and very good reproducibility result. We have published many papers in the area based on electrogenerated chemiluminescence, mainly in American Chemical Society journals, Analytic Chemistry, JACS, and other journals. So in the lab, 20 years, just like yesterday. So I graduated about 6 PhD students, 6 master students, and I think I host about 7 visiting professors and 2 postdocs. And of course, undergraduate research is an important part of our kind of duty and mission. So in 20-year period of time, I just read my CV today, about 30 plus students from USM chemistry work in the lab. Many went to medical school, professional school, or other places. And I also, I think, host 10 plus undergraduate research from other universities, like RU program. I'm very proud to host 4 high school students sponsored by Dr. Musson from ACS SEED program. This program is already in, right now?
We
Still
did
going?
not have one this year, yeah. But
Okay.
We'll apply next year for sure.
Okay, so I host 4. 2 of them got ACS awards, $5,000 each. One went to Johns Hopkins University, another one, I think, Ole Miss. So they did very well after study here. Research-wise, we of course care about applications. We also study the fundamental theoretical part, because without fully understanding of the basics, it's difficult to advance the research forward. And difficult to kind of provide revolutionary approach. This is why I look today, actually, I'm still in the top 2% of most cited scientists in the world from 2021 to 24, all there. This indicates my research impact is very high. Even my publication overall maybe 60 something, not very high, but impact I believe is very high in the field. One challenge for our study is that how can you use one approach to analyze several different targets? For example, in blood, you have biomarker 1, 2, 3, 4. Typically, you have to separate one from another to avoid any kind of interference. So we come up with some technology with different ECL labels, target each of the targets who can analyze the 4 or 5 targets together without any separation. So that's the multiplexing detection of ECL. We also published some papers on high explosive detection, such as TNT or so-called triacetone tripoxide, TATP, which is the explosive easily produced by anyone in the kitchen. The terrorists use that quite often in London bombing. So we try to see is any way we can detect easily. So we published 2 papers in that area. But last few years, we try to move our research towards so-called renewable energy. For example, how can we use water, the sunlight, as an energy source to produce electricity, which should be sustainable because current fuel cell cannot last forever. So one way you can do is decompose water, assuming water will be here forever, right? Assuming the sun should be there, otherwise we're in trouble. So there are several ways to decompose water to hydrogen and oxygen. The way is how much external energy you need to supply. One way to reduce is produce some catalyst, effective catalyst. Of course, there are some ways you can do it. You can use expensive platinum gold to decompose relatively easily. But our target, try to produce relatively inexpensive earth-bound materials as catalyst. One is directly apply potential, lower potential to decompose water to hydrogen and oxygen. And then you can use fuel cell setup to combine oxygen and hydrogen together back to water. During this process, you can produce electrons that can be supplied to other use, right? So that's one. Or you can combine the sun, and the sun, you can use the sun energy combined with the catalyst, so-called photoelectric catalyst, to decompose water. So provide extra free, assuming that's free energy, decompose water. In this area, we published a number of papers last several years. One of my PhD students now is working as intern in National Renewable Energy Lab. He's going to graduate next February because we planned next May actually, but he pushed because the work position already waiting for him. He worked there for 10 months and get very good reviews. They have a position for him, so I'm happy to push him out. So that's kind of a student we try to produce. Another student working in ECL now is working in a research and development department in California based. Again, she pushed me try to graduate earlier. Again, the one position available there for her. So I'm happy for these kind of students. So I think I don't need to talk any more because there are so many different terms for you guys, perhaps difficult to understand. So if you have questions, ask me or talk to me or visit my website.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Dr. Mio? So Woo-Jin, if a student was going to come and work for you as an undergraduate, kind of what is their typical time in lab during the week? Kind of how do you arrange that for the undergraduates?
I typically talk to students according to their schedules. And I suggest them to take 392, which is research introduction to research first, to get familiar with the lab environment, the students, and feel comfortable about the research area. And then 1 semester later, if they feel comfortable, they can move to the real project with guidelines from our either PhD student or myself. And schedule-wise, if you sign for 1 credit hour, you are required or expect to have at least 3 hours in lab. If you sign for 3, of course, 9. Typically, I have a weekly group meeting. So at that time, we talk about your research progress, or you have some questions we need to deal with, or whatever you have something to ask, we can solve that. So the student actually, you remember the guy, honor students recommend to me, he worked in a catalyst project and then immediately went to Ohio, a master's degree in electrochemistry. And right after 2 years program, he got 6-figure salary. Right after, he sent me email. I don't remember the name, Kerb or something. But you introduced to me,
Yeah.
that guy.
Uh-huh.
So if you, this area is difficult because you're scared about electrochemistry. What's electron transfer? Immediately lost. But if you really like to work in the area, you have a good future because batteries related to the area, renewable energy, clearly very hot research area. I don't see anything.
Yeah, I would just say that, we're going to talk a little bit about this year's Nobel Prize today, right, in chemistry. But a couple of years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, Good Enough won the Nobel for the development of
Yeah,
the
battery, lithium battery.
lithium-ion battery.
Yeah.
Every one of you that I see devices out, every one of you are dependent on stuff that he does.
Related at least.
Related at least, that's right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we're able to carry small things around because of lithium-ion battery technology. Because before that, we were nickel metal hydride and lead acid,
Yeah.
and these batteries were big, heavy, and bulky. And so, literally, the old cell phones were called bricks for a reason. They weighed as much as a brick. So if you're interested in building things, engineering's kind of the direction you might want to head. If you're interested in analyzing things or probing in on mechanisms and different things, analytical is kind of, and one of the things we're going to talk about this semester, we're going to talk about the subdisciplines of chemistry. Does everybody remember what the subdisciplines are? There's organic, inorganic, analytical, physical. What's the fifth generally considered area? And biochemistry, right? Chemical engineering, we'll also throw that in there as well as 6. But typically, most people think of engineering as just as the engineering discipline. But certainly there's overlap with chemical engineering and chemistry for sure. And so in our department, there are 6.
Yeah.
So we actually include the chemical engineering component as well.
Yeah.
And we'll be talking about at least the 5. We'll be talking about those throughout the semester to give you an idea, because you're going to take a course in organic if you haven't already. You're going to be in Dr. Miao's analytical class.
311, 411.
311, 411. You're going to be in a physical chemistry class. You're going to be in chemical literature with Dr. Amati. You're going to be in an inorganic class where you're learning about some of these earth-abundant transition metals. You're going to be learning about those types of things. So we'll make those connections, and I hope to be able to bring in additional faculty members throughout the semester to come in and talk. And so hopefully we'll be able to talk to somebody from the biochemistry realm, the inorganic chemistry realm, the physical chemistry realm. I will talk to you about organic chemistry. That's my area. And so you'll get a flavoring of all of these things. And so hopefully one or more of these will kind of spark your interest. You can go talk to a faculty member about getting involved in undergraduate research. So let's thank Dr. Miao and Dr. Amati again. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. Good to see you. Yeah, take care.
Thank you so much. Dr.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming. What do y'all think? You like that? Like hearing people come and talk about what to do? How many of you are, give me just a second, how many of you are a little intimidated by things that you heard? Yeah, right? It's okay. It's just like if you've ever taken a foreign language class and you walked in and all of a sudden the teacher starts speaking in French or Spanish or Portuguese or whatever, you felt a little intimidated, right? Absolutely. And that's what it is now. Part of what you're going to have to adapt to, and you will, is the language of chemistry. Right? You're getting some of that now in your general chemistry class. For those of you in organic, you will learn a lot of different language, and it will eventually become natural to you. Right? So whatever your native language was, do you remember learning how to speak that? You were just immersed in it, right? And you eventually picked up on what mom and dad or aunts and uncles all said, and eventually you picked up the language. But you have no recollection as a youngster of quote-unquote learning the language. You may have recollections and probably do of being in your English classes or your speech classes or whatever in school. But you know, you went to school knowing how to speak and communicate in your native language for the most part without really realizing it. And it takes time is what I'm getting at, right? And so don't be intimidated by some of the language that you heard today. We're not going to throw you in there and say, sink or swim. We're going to mentor you through your undergraduate reading. We do not expect you to come in with all of the ideas. We do not expect you to come in ready to understand every word. But as you are involved, just like when you were a youngster learning your native language, right? If you're immersed in it, you will pick things up and you will start to assimilate that and you will start to speak the language of chemistry for sure. You had a question.
Yeah. Is there a prerequisite for Chemistry 392?
There is not, other than to say you must have instructor permission. So that's a very good question. For those of you who are thinking about taking Chemistry 392, it is not a degree requirement that you complete Chemistry 392, but it is a good idea and it can count towards your elective credit. You need to go and talk to a faculty member before you sign up. So you're not supposed to just go in and say, oh, I must sign up for Dr. Masterson's Chemistry 392 class. You need to have instructor permission before you do that. But that's the only prerequisite.
Does that course count as chemistry minor?
It does. Yes. Yes, it does. Do you have a question? Okay. All right. So, a couple things I want to talk about out of Canvas today. Does the internet seem to be running slow today for everybody? Okay. All right. So I'm not, well, maybe I am crazy, but it's not because of that. So I have given you a couple of links, one called Curriculum Vitae and one called CV. We will talk more about this next week, but I want you to start thinking about your resume/CV. That's the last assignment, big assignment out of this class. Not the only assignment, but the last big assignment, right? It's worth 100 points. You all have to develop a curriculum vitae, or at this point it'd be more likely to be thought of as a resume. So I want you to look at that stuff. We'll talk more about that next week. I'm actually going to try to bring in career services to talk to you about your CV. But I do want to start now. How many of you have a resume? Okay, a good number of you, but not everybody. And that's fine. There's no real reason for most of you to have one at this point, right? But you need to start building your resume, and that resume will eventually morph into a curriculum vitae, especially if you stay in academia. By that I mean going on to professional school or graduate school. You'll start to build a CV. Can anybody tell me what the difference between a resume and a CV is?
They're basically the same words, but maybe in US you call it resume and in some countries you call it CV. But I think one difference is that in CV you include the things that you have done over your course of life. That includes everything, your education, experiences, achievements and skills. Resume is a short format, one-page format, where you are trying to tell what the employer wants to get from you. Maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a very good description. I would just reiterate what you said by saying it's largely length is the difference. I have one CV, I have multiple resumes. So I actually have a piece of software. Every faculty member has a piece of software that manages our CV, and I'll talk to you about that next time. But the CV is my entire body of work. You are starting on your CV now. It's just going to be small enough right now that you can call it a CV or a resume. Okay? I do not expect you in the assignment that is there for you to put together a 30-page CV like I have. You're too young. It hasn't happened yet. It will happen for you all, right? But it's too early. But you will be able to put together a resume. It is very important for you to have that now and build that as you go on, because when you get towards your senior year and you get ready to apply to medical school, or you get ready to apply for a fellowship, or you get ready to apply to graduate school, or you get ready to apply for a job, the last thing you want to do is panic and sit there and try to remember everything you did that you need. It's much easier to have everything on an ongoing basis. You need to have a file on your computer and backed up and on the cloud, your resume / CV, and you need to add to it as you're doing things, okay? And so this assignment that is there to get you started with that. If you've already got one, use the techniques that you've learned in this, because there are some things that are do's and don'ts that you may not be aware of. Folks are typically not concerned with fancy fonts or cutesy little images. You don't want to convey, you want to convey a professional CV, and so we'll talk about that next time as well. All right, so you can go ahead and get started on that on your own. I also had you view, this was about 15 minutes, an interview with former Golden Eagle Madison Hanson. Madison worked in my laboratory as an undergraduate student. What was unique about Madison?
She was a music major.
Yep, she was not only a music major, she was a music biochemistry double major, wasn't she? Well, chemistry parentheses biochemistry. It should just be called biochemistry, by the way. Yes, she had two very difficult, in terms of time commitment, majors. Because in music, she not only had to take the music classes, she had to practice every week. She had to do concerts. She had to do research, right? So she was a very committed young lady doing her, and she was in the honors college, which added another time commitment. So she didn't get a lot of sleep, but she enjoyed every bit of it. What else can you tell me that you took from the conversation I had with her? Yes?
She didn't make that decision like right away. She started off as a music major and she like went the pre-major with classes and she made that decision towards the end.
Yep, she made that decision later on to do the double major, absolutely. What else did she say that maybe resonated with you? Anything? Okay, we'll give it some thought. I'm sure there's some other things that resonated there with you. What I will tell you is Madison is a fantastic individual, very driven and motivated. She's now in the MD PhD program at UMC. She had desires to go out of state for medical school, got interviews, but ultimately got accepted at UMC. My point being that it is difficult to get into medical school outside of your home state. Even with a resume as impressive as hers, it is very difficult to get into medical schools outside of your home state or your state of residence. Can anybody tell me why that might be the case?
Well, these schools don't want to train doctors to work in their state.
That's right.
We want to train doctors to work in Mississippi.
That's right. That's exactly right. So if we're in New York and you're coming from Mississippi to be in my medical school, what are your odds of staying in New York?
Not very well. low.
Probably pretty low, right? And so medical schools have been, for lack of a better term, rigged to accept people from the state with the hope that they will stay and continue to practice, because they're putting that state's tax dollars into that system, okay? And so if you all are thinking about, well, I want to go to medical school and I'm thinking about going to X, it's not impossible. It's just more difficult, okay? And I want you all to understand that early on. I'm not trying to crush anybody's dreams. Dream big, okay? But also have a backup plan. So if you're thinking about, and I say this because we did have a major many years ago who refused to apply to UMC because he was going to go out of state. He got 2 interviews and no offers.
What is UMC?
University of Mississippi Medical Center. It's our state school here in Jackson. So, sorry about that. But, yeah, so he was like, no, I'm going out of state. Well, he ended up not going to medical school. So he had to find something else to do. And so there are more qualified people to go to medical school than there are medical school slots. I have every reason to believe that each and every one of you, if you wanted to go to medical school, are smart enough, capable enough, and determined enough to go to medical school. But there's only so many slots. And then you take on that they're going to only accept, in-state. So the number of slots it is very difficult. And so one of the things that you have to keep in mind is a backup plan. That backup plan can be, I'm going to apply to UMC if I'm thinking about going out of state. But the backup plan can also be, what do I do if I don't get in round 1? Do I apply the next year? A lot of people who apply the next year get accepted, right? So keep that in mind as well as you're thinking about your future, because I know many of you are thinking about medical school, and that's one of the questions that Madison had to ask when she was not getting accepted to the out-of-state programs. She had to make a decision: do I wait another year and try again to get into an out-of-state program, or do I go to UMC? She and I had a long conversation about that, and I just told her what the odds were. I said the odds of getting into an out-of-state institution are tough. So she ultimately decided to go to UMC. She's now an MD PhD program. She's going to be a fantastic professor someday, and I don't think she made the wrong decision. Wait, I think she made the right decision. Did I say that correct? So something for you all to think about. All right. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time today talking about the Nobel Prize. Computational protein design and protein structure prediction. Why is this important? Why is this deserving of $1 million prize? Why should you care about this?
Medicine.
Medicine, okay. Yes, sir.
Is involved in genetics.
In genetics, okay. What else?
It's just a real function. Like everything, like our DNA, everything is coded to make proteins, and that's how all life
That's right. So Dr. Meow mentioned that I'm a mass spec expert. I don't know that I would label myself as an expert, but I use a lot of mass spec. We do mass spec on things called proteins, and we use that information to do a number of things. But I would argue, and some of my biochemistry, biology friends would disagree with me, but that's just where all the fun is, right? The disagreements. I would argue that genetics is less important than proteins and what happens to those proteins after they're actually made. And so, how do you take a protein sequence and how do you determine whether or not it's going to function in a particular way? One of the things you all are going to learn in your chemistry studies is that structure equals what? Function. That's exactly right. So think about an egg for a moment. an egg white. If you crack an egg and you get the egg white, what's its physical state? It's liquid. It's kind of a slimy liquid, right? But it's liquid. What happens when you put it in a hot pan? It solidifies, right? It becomes a fried egg, right? What changed? The protein denatured. It changed its shape. It took on different physical properties, right? And so this work is important because up until now, we haven't really been able to take a protein sequence, you know, alanine, glycine, blah, 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 and haven't really been able to go, well, given that, it's going to have this shape. And since it has that shape, it's going to have this function, right? That's important. It's been many people's PhD theses over the last century to just determine the protein structure of one protein. Oh, we've got an unknown protein and it does this really interesting thing. I wonder what it looks like. That was people's PhD dissertations back in the day. It took years to determine that. But what's really cool about this? AI is certainly cool about it. We'll talk a little bit more of that, particularly machine learning, right?
In type in a sequence of what any amino acid and it'll show you what the protein.
Yeah, it predicts for us
And
what
lets
the,
you use it for other functions.
yeah. So, largely in our history as people of science, we've identified proteins that have a particular function and we've been thinking about what do they look like and to try to understand that, right? Now we can do the reverse, can't we? Hey, I need something that does this. I can feed it to this, and I can say, what would that need to look like? And now that I know what that would need to look like, I can predict what the amino acid sequence would need to be. And so now I can genetically engineer E. coli to make that sequence, which will then fold into the shape, which will then do what I need it to do. So this is really cool from that perspective. Okay? So, do you all think that this was Nobel worthy?
Yes,
Why do you think that's Nobel worthy?
because this could determine the evolution in genetics.
Okay.
Because it's a computer AI predicting a protein sequence. So we probably can take what we learned from that and predict how it evolved as humans.
Okay. All right, I'll buy that. Anybody else?
It can be used in multiple fields of chemistry. Because, I mean, like, yeah, biochemistry can use it, organic chemistry can use it. I mean, even polymer science can use this different thing to develop new materials and do more research. Because they have the foundation of it, and so they're not gonna have to spend a significant amount of time trying to figure out what the protein structure is. They can just go ahead and know what they're looking for.
Okay. All right. Do you have something?
Medicine wise,
Okay.
you can use, like if you need, a certain enzyme or substrate or whatever, like the enzymes in protein.
Mm-hmm.
And not a protein, and so you can make an enzyme that would specifically break down a certain thing, or like it can help medically remove problems.
So again, I'm going to say something that'll be controversial to some of my biochemistry friends. So when you all go into biochem, they may say I'm full of baloney, and that's okay, right? But this is my perspective on it. One thing that I think you need to remember is that all enzymes are proteins. And that's where they'll say baloney, because they think there's some other enzymes out there, but I might not. All enzymes are proteins. But not all proteins are enzymes, right? But when you take medicine, most of the time, medicines are trying to inhibit some enzyme to keep it from doing what it was doing. Okay? So usually what happens when we get ill, our body is producing these things called prostaglandins. You don't need to worry about that. So that helps us, it causes fever, inflammation, all kinds of things. And so they actually make drugs like Tylenol that target that enzyme and inhibit it to keep it from doing that. And that's how our fever comes down. And that's how all of these things work, right? And so, being able to target an enzyme by knowing its shape, by knowing how it functions, all of a sudden we can start to design medicines now better, I think, with this. Or we can start to do a variety of things, as was mentioned earlier. What else did you take? I heard somebody say something about AI. What was so important about that?
It just shows that it can help make us more advancements in the future. Like this is just one of the first things AI has been able to do.
So what does, yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with what you said, but what, did AI contribute to the fact that this was Nobel worthy? Or is it just a tool? What's your opinion? It's a tool? Okay, it's a tool. I'll buy that. I mean, I think you can answer it either way. But it is a tool, it's there to help us. Theoretically, we can do everything AI can do, right? But not on the time scale that AI can do it, right? That's the real power, right? So if you read in there, in one of those papers, right, it was talking about the possible shapes that a protein sequence could take. And I think if it was, I could be misremembering, but if there was like 100 amino acids, there's like 10 to the 43rd possible orientations. I think that was the number. Well, think about a mole. A mole is a big number, right? That's only 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. And this 100 amino acids could, in theory, fold 10 to the 43rd different ways. How long would that take for us to sit there and go through them one at a time to try to figure out, well, if I did one shape every second, that would be 10 to the 43rd seconds. How many billion years is that? That's a lot. So, but AI, with all of the nodes and all of the magic that it can do for us, right? We can start to explore that space much faster. And that's the kind of thing that they were able to really do here, in my opinion, that's really noteworthy. Now, my oldest daughter is a chemistry PhD student up in the Northeast, and we were talking about the Nobel Prize, and I asked her, I said, what did you think about it? And she said, ah. And I said, what do you mean, ah? She said, well, the paper only came out 3 years ago. It's too early for him to get a Nobel Prize. What do you all think about that? Do you think this was so groundbreaking that it deserved a Nobel Prize 3 years after they reported this in, what was it, Nature? Do you think that matters? Does time increase the significance of this finding? I don't think so. I kind of disagreed with her. I said, you're just jealous, right? You're working really hard. You've been working since then, and you haven't got your PhD yet. So I understand why you're upset. These people worked. Well, they worked hard. I'm not going to take that away. Obviously, they worked hard. But they were able to reap the rewards of the award fairly quickly after their seminal paper that came out. And that is a bit unusual. Usually people get awards after many years after their work and the body has been built up. But I think the fact that this problem is such a huge problem, right, 10 to the 43rd possible, and they're able now to predict that relatively quickly, I think it did merit a Nobel Prize. Do you think maybe the fact that there's so much hot buzz right now about AI, that may have contributed to the early awarding of the prize?
I was just gonna say, like, even though we've had AI, like AI still, and it's like we've only known about AI for 2 years, and so I think the reason why they won it is because they were able to do something really significant with it, and I think that's why they won it. Like, I wouldn't say it was a tool, I think it's the reason why they won it.
Okay, well, that's a fair assessment.
We can say that because Nobel Prize of Physics is also being set at the same time.
Yeah, so the physics one also had AI involved in it, right? So these Nobel Prize winners, anybody know where they're located? Well, the Swedish Academy is the one that gives the Nobel, but the people that actually won this award, 2 of them are at DeepMind, which is a Google, and then the University of Washington, that's right. So Google has a hand in this particular prize as well, right, in terms of DeepMind. And so, do you all think there's going to be more Nobel Prizes with the advent of AI, or do you think that it won't make any difference?
Probably because it'll really expand the way people can do research.
Yeah.
Because it'll, because you can run a program or like an experiment through AI, you don't have to, if it would take 3 years in, real time, you could run it through AI and it could, shorten it by such a significant amount.
So as students, what are you hearing about AI from the university right now?
Don't use it.
Do not use
Don't
it.
use it. Is that the right message we should be sending you all?
No.
I don't think so, right? I don't have the power to change this. But how many people today think nothing about using a calculator? Any of you fear using a calculator? No. When I was in high school, not college, calculator, get my hand slapped. You were not supposed to use a calculator. That's cheating. Nobody thinks of that as cheating anymore. It's a tool to help you, right? And I think one of the things that I hope we can wrap our heads around as higher education is how to get you all to use AI ethically, right? You should not use it just to write your paper by just saying, hey, ChatGPT, I need a paper on the American Revolution, and it needs to be 10 pages long. Crank it out, right? But it's a tool, right? It's just like collaborating with another person, right? And so there's a way in which we can do this ethically, responsibly. And I'm afraid that one of the messages you all are hearing is it's to be avoided, it's to be feared. It is to be respected. You need to know what your professors expect of you in its use. In this class, I've given you the ability to use AI. I've told you I encourage you to use AI. I would be perfectly happy if you write your first draft of your CV or resume and you give it to ChatGPT and ask it to help you make it better. I have no problem with that. What I would have a problem with is if you told ChatGPT, just make me a resume, and all of it's a bunch of lies, right? But if you put together all of your stuff and you gave it to ChatGPT and you said, help me format it or help me, make it more professional, I have no problem with that whatsoever. I have nothing for you to write on this today. Just turn it in so I know that you've been here. I will have everything up and ready for you, and I will see you all next week.